Good morning. Housing affordability in Australia. My name is Anthony.
And hi, my name is Vaishnavi, and today we are going to present the housing affordability in Australia.
For the purpose of this presentation, all in-text citation are bolded on the slides.
Okay, so we are going to begin with the housing affordability, which is the relationship between the expenses on housing, which includes the house prices and the mortgage payment. And the second one is the average annual income. There's a evidence to show over the past 20 years, housing affordability in Australia has decreased. This decrease has happened to a point where recent data shows housing affordability crisis. This corroborates the research presented to the Parliament of Australia, showing that house price to income ratio index shows a 78 increase between 1980 and 2015. The evidence is the increased proportion of households spending more than 30% of their income on housing over the last 2 decades. For this study, we will be looking at the Queensland housing market. We are defining the housing affordability crisis at the increased proportion of home buyers spending a significant proportion of their income on mortgage payments and the bank shares of non-performing housing loans.
For the chart to show median price of homes and annual earnings in Queensland, the blue line represents the median price of homes and the orange line represents an average annual earnings. For both the data shows the last 20 years with the arrows representing the ratio of median price to average annual earnings today, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and 20 years ago. For the ratio of median price of homes in Queensland to average annual earnings is at its highest level recorded as of March 2024. Housing is the most expensive it has ever been. The significant increase of non-performing housing loans suggests that people are also struggling to pay their mortgage more than ever before. Now, the blue line represents impaired housing loans, past due home loans, and total home loans, which total home loans banks non-performing share of housing loans. Now, the average proportion of income needed to service a new mortgage blew out to 48.9% nationwide during the March 2024 quarter. This is up from 43.1% a year ago and a sharp jump from the 34.8% decade average. Housing affordability is at its worst in more than 2 decades.
On this slide, we are going to see the demand side factors of the Queensland housing markets. For one, purchase of homes as an investment. You can see there is an increased number of property investors in the recent years. Demand comes from the both Queensland as well as the overseas, which are looking forward to purchase homes as an investment purposes. The motivation to purchase the investment property is to generate an annuity style income. The second scenario is where you can see there is an increased population due to immigration. You can see that Australia is taking in immigrants at a record numbers. Immigrants and their family need a place to live. As far the Queensland housing market is concerned, in immigrants who have bought their savings with them contribute to the number of house buyers. The Australian Financial Review stated in January 2024 that migration surges in Australia have contributed to the rising house prices.
Both purchase of home as an investment and higher levels of immigration increases number of buyers in the market. This causes the demand curve to shift to the right. This results in a higher equilibrium price at P prime and quantity at Q prime.
On this slide, we are going to see the supply side factors of the Queensland housing markets. For the shortage of the land zone to build a residential property, despite the large geographical size of Australia, most residential housing centers are around the capital cities. In Queensland, councils release limited zones to build residential properties around Brisbane, with the remaining land zone for either commercial or industrial purposes. This has created a supply constraint in the land suitable for residential housing. The second factor is the increased building cost. The COVID pandemic has been seen a disruption in the global supply chain. This has coupled with the Australian government implementing a policy of not issuing new visas to the temporary workers. You can see there is in the construction firms, people they are unable to buy raw materials and hire new laborers at an affordable rate, which has resulted to a 30% surge in the residential construction cost between March 2020 and March 2023.
Both the shortage of land zoned to build residential property and increased building costs has caused the quantity of housing, Queensland housing supply to be decreased, while the price to increase. This can be represented from a leftward shift in the supply curve.
On the slide, we are going to see the shape of the supply curve. The steepness of the supply curve, as far you can see, the supply curve of the Queensland housing market is highly competitive. There are many different options at any given price point. We believe that the supply curve for the Queensland housing market is shallow. This means there is a reduction in housing prices, which will adversely affect the quantity of houses supplied to the market. This can be seen when a seller does not sell his house under a reserve price and finds a new buyer instead.
For factors constraining housing supply, the first factor is interest rates. When interest rates rise dramatically, we can see a short-term decline in property prices. This is because investors with large housing loans find that it's no longer profitable and choose to sell their investment properties. This increases the number of houses in the markets for sale. The second factor is zoning regulations. The government and local councils have reserved land for commercial and industrial purposes. This creates a constraint for new houses to be built. Releasing new land, new high-density housing would remedy this. The third factor is high construction costs. With developers facing high construction costs, it becomes challenging for construction projects to be profitable. This creates a constrained housing supply.
On the slide, we are going to see the evolution of the first home owners grant. According to the State Revenue Office, the objective of the first home owners grant or FHOG is to help property buyers purchase their first house. Our analysis indicates that the FHOG is not as effective as a price control measure. This is because it provides additional capital that Queensland buyers can access towards a down payment, which increases the demand and price in the overall market. Instead, the FHOG is effective only for a certain buyer groups, which are the buyers who are already saving up to buying their first home. The Australian Institute going even further to the state that the scheme may actually reduce housing accessibility in the long term. This is because of the effect on the demand side of the equation, which works by giving people more money to spend on housing.
From a graphical analysis viewpoint, implementing the FHOG will cause the demand curve to shift to the right, because buyers will have an additional $30,000 to contribute to their down payment. We can see the effect of the first homeowners grant being implemented from property prices index of Australian capital cities. The Australian government introduced the first homeowners grant on 1st July 2000, which can be seen from the black line in the middle of the chart here. Since then, the rate of house price increase has accelerated across all markets, including Queensland. Furthermore, we can analyze the effect of the government increasing the FHOG when the Australian government announced that the grant will increase from 15,000 to 30,000 for eligible first home buyers on 20th of November 2023. We have witnessed the rate of increase of total value of Australian housing accelerate. On the Queensland housing market level of analysis, house prices surged 8.1% in 2023 with a higher number of transactions on record.
For the steepness of the supply curve, which relates and the FHOG, you can see the supply side of the Australian housing is highly competitive. There are many different options for any given price point. We believe that the supply curve for the Queensland housing market is shallow, where a reduction in the housing prices would adversely affect the quantity of houses supplied to the market. This can only be seen when a seller does not sell his house under a reserve price. The seller would hold or attempt to find a new buyer instead. As for who receive more of FHOG subsidy, we believe that the seller receive more of the FHOG grant subsidy since the steepness of the supply curve is very shallow. Furthermore, the FHOG monies can only be released when the buyers commit to the purchasing a home, resulting in an immediate transfer of the grant money from the buyers to the sellers upon the sale of the house. The FHOG benefits the seller more than it does to the buyers.
Now, for alternative policies to increase housing affordability, the first policy we recommend implementing is increasing additional foreign acquirers duty from 8% to 20%. Currently, foreigners looking to purchase homes in Queensland will have to pay an additional stamp duty of only 8%. By increasing AFAD to 20%, the cost of foreign investors looking to invest in Queensland would increase. This will reduce the total number of buyers at any price in the short term, which favors Queensland buyers looking to buy houses without having to compete with foreigners or foreign investors. A similar policy has already been implemented by the Singapore government to cool its red hot housing market. Foreign investors must pay 60% stamp duty to purchase homes, and the policy has been touted as highly effective at controlling prices in its competitive housing market. The second policy we recommend is to release more land for residential development purpose in order to increase the supply of housing in long term. We propose releasing more land for residential development purposes to enable more houses to be built and more quantity of housing to be available on the market for purchase. Graphically, this is represented by shifting the supply curve to the right, where the quantity of housing would increase while the cost of housing would decrease. A similar policy has already been adopted by the Hong Kong government in 2023 with the objective of meeting housing demand in the coming 10 years. Thank you so much for listening, and please refer to these slides for the references we've used during this presentation.
Thank you.